You're listening to the OCD Stories podcast, hosted by me, Stuart Ralph. The OCD Stories is a podcast dedicated to raising awareness and understanding around obsessive-compulsive symptoms. I do this through interviewing inspired therapists, psychologists, and people who have experienced OCD. Welcome to the OCD Stories. And welcome to episode 446 of the podcast. And in this one, therapist Jonny Say and myself did a live podcast with an audience at the 29th International OCD Foundation Conference in Orlando, Florida. Just before hitting record, we asked the audience for topics they wanted us to cover, and then we did our best to answer those topics live. So thank you so much to the people that turned up in attendance, and thank you to them for the topics they gave us. So in this episode, we discuss my full circle moment, Jonny's experience of the conference, perfectionism, hyper-responsibility, how loved ones can look after themselves when supporting someone with OCD, how loved ones can support their loved ones with OCD, Just Right OCD, I-CBT, and much more. And thank you to NoCD for supporting the podcast. NoCD offers effective and convenient therapy available in the US and outside the US. To find out more about NoCD, their therapy plans, if they currently take your insurance, or to download their free app, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD stories, or the link will be in the episode description. Thank you to all of our patrons for supporting our work. To sign up to our Patreon and to check out the other benefits you'll receive as a patron, please see the link in the show notes. So again, thank you so much to the audience and their topics. And of course, thank you to you guys for listening as always. And thank you to Jonny. And without further ado, here we are on the live episode. Welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. For those listening that aren't here, there's a massive audience, about 1,000 people. It's quality, not quantity. So I guess I just wanted to start for you guys and everyone listening. You know, I came, this is my fourth conference, first one since the pandemic. So it's great to be back. I'm 37 now. When I was 7, I came to Orlando with my family to do Disney, Universal, all of that stuff. Great holiday. It's like the only time me and my brother didn't fight for like a 2-week period. So that was a testament to Disney and the power of story and stuff like that. But it was when I first got my first intrusive thought was the night I landed, and I was it was like a Denny's or a Wendy's or something like that. And my dad was ill. I think jet lag or plain food or something like that. But in my head, I was really worried that a tarantula was going to come and bite him, kill him. And it was this repetitive thought in my head. I was sitting with I think my mum was there, my brother was there maybe. Still very clear in my head. And it was this, I need to tell my mum, otherwise he's going to die and something bad's going to happen. I never said anything because I don't know, maybe I thought it was insane at that time. I kept my mouth quiet. Anyway, got back. Obviously, he wasn't dead or attacked. Weirdly enough, I went back to watch Arachnophobia, which I had seen prior to coming to America. And there's an exact scene where the tarantula crawls under the cover and kills the guy. So my brain had stored that and was replaying it. And then the next day was in the pool, and I couldn't go more than the corner of the pool. I would dive in and get straight out. Because the thought was, the moment I got in, I was flooded with anxiety, a shark was going to attack me, obviously in a pool, right? So that, and obviously, you know, we're here right now, right? Florida in this time of year is disgusting in terms of heat. And, profusely sweating and all of that. And as a 7-year-old, you want to be in the pool, you want to have fun, but I couldn't. My brother would occasionally, trap me in. He was older and stronger than me, and I would almost be panic attack level anxiety. And anyway, so I couldn't be in the pool. But I guess I'm just sharing this one. It's 30 years almost to the month that I was here and that happened, and my brain arguably broke. And I was in the pool just before this with my eyes closed, just relaxed, and I was at peace. And it was such a nice full circle moment to not have these bombarding images in my head. I did get one, but I kind of did what I needed to do. I'm just sharing that. And then I spent sort of 10 minutes in sort of self-compassion exercise, thinking about my younger self, talking to him in that moment at that pool 30 years ago. and sort of rewriting and basically doing gradual exposure with him in memory. And yeah.
That's so cool, Stu. That's like full circle, isn't it? Amazing.
Yeah, I was worried I'd get more of those thoughts, but I would have dealt with them.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to share that. And yeah, thank you, Jonny, for being a guest again.
My pleasure. It's been great to travel with you to the conference. This is my first conference here, and everyone's made me feel so welcome, and some fascinating talks and really nice people. So yeah, I'm having a great time.
Cool. And obviously, Jonny, you listen to the podcast. We've known each other for 6-7 years now.
Yeah.
We last year set up our business together, which has been great. And listening to all the guests, and you've now seen them, i.e. like Hirschfield, Grayson, Abramovich, all those people. What's it like?
The 4 Johns.
Having met
I've been trying to become the 5th John, but I don't think anyone's up for it yet.
You got blanked,
I've got to do 15 more of these before they'll even listen to me. So what's it like meeting them?
Yeah.
I mean, I think going back to what you said, your podcast was a big part of my recovery actually before I met you. Like many people we've met here, learning about OCD, learning about recovery methods. And some of the people that you talked about there actually had a big part of my recovery journey. I mean, John Hirschfield, I think his book was one of the first books I read about Puro and intrusive thoughts. And I was very into mindfulness before that. And that was actually how I found his book. So meeting him, he was talking about being starstruck and, being around all these well-known therapists and then gradually getting more comfortable and then becoming, a big name at this conference and someone presenting a lot. And I was certainly feeling starstruck. I always do around these sorts of people, but it is, wonderful to meet them. And I love it when you see the human side and you see people reveal, sort of showing their vulnerability and their true self, which is a big part of acceptance and commitment therapy, which is, my main modality alongside ERP is ACT, and just seeing people practicing, their values here is wonderful. Yeah.
Awesome. So we just before we started, we chatted to the people that are here. There's obviously some new ones come in. If there's any topics you want us to cover, shout them up. We'll write them down. If not, we'll go through the list of those that have given us topics. So we haven't planned and prepared this, so forgive us for the lack of quality.
Yeah. We'll have self-compassion though, so it'll be fine.
We'll diffuse later on the judgment. So perfectionism, first topic. Yeah,
perfectionism. I mean, I guess the question was a little bit around, obviously the treatment and working with it. As I said, my answers here will be very much the integration of acceptance and commitment therapy and ERP. I'm not an ERP purist, and that really goes back to my own recovery journey and what was most helpful to me. So I'm very into ACT because that was what was really helpful for me. So my answers will bias that way a little bit, but obviously those therapies integrate really nicely. So perfectionism, I guess often with clients, the way they think about the world in a perfectionistic way is often helping them in lots of areas. So, it makes them be, great in their jobs and really that attention to detail. And so it can be very hard to let go of that because it is rewarding them in lots of places. So I come in with the workability part of ACT, which is if we look at these behavioral responses, how are they working for you over the long term? Are they taking you towards your values, your goals, what you want your life to be like? Where is it actually not working? And I think with perfectionism, you always find it's unworkable in the sense that, you just can't be perfect on everything. Unfortunately, I don't have this affliction, and I've always had to be honest, actually, I do have a little bit of this when I was younger, and I think I almost rebelled against it with a sort of attitude of that'll do. I've always had that voice in my head, so sometimes I have to try and improve the quality of things. But, I think if you really live in perfectionistically, you can't maintain that on, multiple areas. So looking at the workability, identifying where it's tripping people up, getting agreement on that, because otherwise it's hard to challenge it. It's hard to give it up. So that would be one piece. The other one is self-compassion and perfectionism. I think they have to be, you have to develop self-compassion, I think, or some form of sort of self-acceptance. I think perfectionism is often driven by these sort of early experiences of, some form of judgment or some form of message that I have to perform well in order to be loved and accepted. And so I'll often do that work as well. Obviously, we're majoring on ERP and ACT, but from a compassion-focused therapy perspective, we're often going back into the history and looking at the sort of shame networks that might sit below the perfectionism. And so if you can soften all of that up and you can get a sense of like, it's nice to achieve stuff, it's great to have goals, but that isn't my worth, that's not what I'm dependent on. Then I think that combined with the ERP and the ACT skills can be a really powerful way of working with perfectionism.
Oh. Yeah, good answer. I think, it's definitely, I'm not a perfectionist. My belief is just get it done. Hence why I've managed to do the podcast every week. If I was a perfectionist, I would have quit a long time ago, or just not hit the deadline. I remember my old boss before I became a therapist. He got so annoyed at me not like missing things and not being polished, because he probably was a bit of a perfectionist. Yeah. He told me to, almost a bit patronizingly, but he meant it in a good way. He said, ask yourself before you send me anything, is this the best I could have done?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Crikey.
And I was like, and look, to a point, I needed to hear that because, again, Pareto's law, 20% of your effort gives you 80% of your results. I still believe that and live by that. But at times I've had to learn to be a bit more perfectionistic because some things do need not perfectionism, but quality. And that's maybe where the value side of things come in. Is it's okay to be perfectionistic at times if it's serving your values and what matters to you. If it's not, and it's causing you problems in life. And if you think about sort of OCPD, we did the talk this morning, so perfectionism in that and how OCPD can really affect people's lives. Yeah,
and I was thinking, in terms of the ERP side of it, you've all probably heard of the sort of exposures you can do where you do something, imperfect and you send an email which you haven't edited, or you come onto a podcast without preparing, or yes, those exposures are all great, but really it's about getting the buy-in that someone's behavior isn't really working for them, and then can we change it across the board, and can we identify where you use the superpower of attention to detail and really looking for quality, and then where do you give yourself a timer for that? So you say it's okay to really focus on detail for an hour, but I cannot go beyond that. And then at that point, from an app perspective, you're doing urge surfing. So you're catching that urge to overwork the piece of work, to go over it and over and over it. And that is a strong urge, as I'm sure if anyone has perfectionism, and it's a really physical urge that people are having to work with. And so you're kind of using ACT skills to observe that urge, that impulse to go back and start typing or doing something again. And then you've got to have value-based alternatives, so the things to turn towards instead of that. So I think urge surfing is a big part of it. But yeah, all the classic ERP exposures are great, but I think working at that sort of principle level across the board, and then, lining someone's life up with their values and goals, and then, that can be some of the best exposure work, I think.
Nice. So, hyper-responsibility.
Yeah. I mean, hyper-responsibility is really at the core of so much of OCD, isn't it? It's that sense that, I have this massive role in keeping people safe, keeping myself safe, avoiding catastrophic things happening. Certainly as a young kid, I mean, I had OCD since I was, as long as I can remember, but, since 6. And, so much of it was feeling, that responsibility to be a good person and to have good thoughts and not do, not put anyone at risk. So yeah, I know it from the inside, definitely. So, I mean, the brilliant thing with an ACT approach is you are often applying the same skills to multiple different challenges. So for me, with hyper-responsibility, again, there's going to be a lot of self-compassion, that sense of like, I'm not expecting other people out in the world to be as responsible as I am, myself, or telling myself to be. And why is that? Why is that asymmetry? And probably it's because there's shame and guilt and, probably a lot of guilt really at the heart of this. So getting self-compassion in there can, again, soften that all up so it's easier to work on it with ERP. I think, it was interesting that one of the talks I saw yesterday was talking really, I heard it as like, do you work on the beliefs and to what extent you have to do that versus what extent you just do the behavioural ERP and that changes it. And I think for me, it's like the combination of those things. They were sort of debating it, but really I think, they're just different processes that can be helpful. So with this one, what unworkable beliefs are there that are saying, I must be responsible for all of this. It's all on me. So I would often look at those kind of beliefs with people and how they aren't going to work. I can't be hyper responsible for everything and then not be letting people down. I'm trying to protect everyone over here, but actually I'm being pulled away from the people I love and care about. Or, like I'm a parent with young kids. If I feel hyper responsible for them, I can't be a playful dad. I can't look after myself and be rejuvenated to come back and give them the best version of me. I can't balance, all my different priorities in life. So it's really, again, that workability of being hyper responsible. And and then there's always that kind of jumping off point. So the point where we're going, okay, I'm going to have to just, if I want to work towards my valued direction, I'm going to have to just take a scary step here and challenge this hyper responsibility. And, John Hoffman yesterday was talking about doing finger push-ups. If you can't do any exercise at all, well, you can start with finger push-ups. And that will stay with me from the conference. I thought that was great. So, that finger push-up way of challenging hyper responsibility, I think is key. Working out what that is, and then building confidence through someone's experience that actually, as I stop being so responsible for everything, I'm actually more available to the people I'm trying to protect and care for.
Yeah, good answer. I think once you've done all that, I then think it comes into diffusion. Yeah. So another, obviously, there's many ACT skills that work on diffusion, but for me, was it today after today or last night I ironed, and my brain was already going, I switched it off. I knew I'd unplugged it, but it was still going, well, is it unplugged? And I went back and checked maybe twice, which I shouldn't have done. But there was still that point where I had to go, okay, I know what I'm doing here, notice and name it, diffuse, and then just leave. Yeah. And that's that. And that's scary. You're taking that risk. Yeah. But if I don't notice a name and diffuse it, it gets incredibly hard to let go. So that skill of quite literally name it to tame it, notice and name. But it's a hard one because I think if your compulsions can save someone, then why wouldn't you do it if you're a good person? But of course, it's nonsense, right? And that's where diffusion comes in. I think that's a thought. It's not. It's as Russ Harris does. Thoughts as hands. This is fusion. That's diffusion. Anyone listening, I'm putting my hand on my face for fusion and moving it away for diffusion, and that's the naming it. I'm having a thought right now about X, Y, Z, as opposed to what if I've left the iron on. I'm having a thought I've left the iron on. It's a small difference, but it's a huge difference. And if you practice that skill. We did it on the way over. I don't love flying. I mean, I love it in terms. I think it's an incredible piece of engineering and the physics of lift and all of that the plane uses. I think it's amazing. But it's very anxiety inducing for me. And it was probably one of the best flights I've had in a long time because throughout the weeks leading up to the flight, usually I would ruminate, and then I was getting anxious, or at the airport I would be at like a 6 or a 7, and then as soon as you're on the plane, you're a 7 and 8. And this time I was almost a 0 when I got on the plane. And then there were moments with turbulence where I shot up maybe to a 6, but then I didn't go above that. And the rest of the time I was calm, and that hasn't happened in a long time. And that was quite literally just using the notice and naming skill, and then bringing my attention back to the present.
And me
moment.
Talking at you for 6 hours.
5
as well.
hours, but yeah, it felt like 6.
Felt like 6.
No, I'm joking. That was good. But again, usually I'd be like, don't talk to me. If I'm anxious, I want people to leave me alone, because it's like I need to almost be in my head. I don't need to be in my head, but that's what it feels like.
Monitoring.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas this time it was like, no, I can actually engage with you and talk, which was unique. So, yeah, I think hyper responsibility, as you said, it's the core, one of the cores of OCD. And the other thing that comes to my mind is, I wasn't in the talk, unfortunately, but you went to the trauma and OCD one. Yeah. And I've been, my therapist, I did OCD therapy and all of that. And then I did psychodynamic / person-centered humanistic type counseling for 8 years, working on other stuff, not OCD. And I kept OCD from her at the beginning, because I was like, I don't want to get triggered. I don't need to be pulled into rumination. And so I think that was a good decision. Eventually I did talk about OCD because I was in a place where I just wanted to look at it from a different view and see if there was any wider meaning to it. And my therapist back then, 8 years ago, said to me, your OCD was basically a defense you created to get some sort of control in an environment you felt you had no control. And at the time I was like, yeah, whatever, like that's ridiculous. Yeah. I didn't say that to her, obviously, because I'm English and I keep my opinions to myself. But I thought it. I thought she was crazy. And then in the last sort of 5 years, I've actually kind of agreed with her, at least for me. I'm not saying it's for everyone. And that's what that lady was saying for a lot of people.
One of the functions, she said it could be one of those. Yeah,
so it's really, I think, validating to hear that. I still needed behavioural therapy to get better, but it helped me understand why it was developed, maybe. Again, I'm not fixed on it.
So it's keeping your mind open, really, as a therapist, which I saw in a lot of people over the last couple of days, listening to John Abramovich talking today and his career, and just having that open-mindedness, even when ERP is so effective, to also be open to act, open to other ideas, switching it up, going with the research, but being open to these things. It's great.
I mean, he obviously, we're going to talk about I-CBT in a bit. He obviously doesn't do I-CBT, but he did say in that what he likes about it and appreciates about it.
And he's open to what's being looked at there. Yeah.
Exactly, You've got to keep an open mind. Otherwise, ACT wouldn't... And ACT was kind of protested
There's a
against.
Bit of pushback, wasn't there? Yeah.
Like Tuhig got a lot of stick when he started using ACT and for OCD. Cool. So what's the next one? Oh, yeah.
Well, why don't you go for this one, Stu? Because it was about partners of people with ROCD and supporting in that role, and maybe supporting people with OCD.
So I think, the first part was how loved ones can kind of look after themselves. And it's incredibly hard. I work with parents a lot, and I'll start with parents, but obviously I'm talking about anyone who's in a relationship with someone with OCD. Especially when the theme is based on you, like you're the one the theme's around. So I work with a lot of teenagers especially, and disgust is the main emotion, and the parents are like contaminated for whatever reason, who knows. And I can't think of a reason why the parents typically seem to be doing a good job. There doesn't seem to be any trauma necessarily. The parents find it very hard. They try and be empathic and any loved one and understand. And obviously, when it keeps coming at you, it can eventually it feels like an attack. And then it's hard to be compassionate and kind and patient. I know I've been on the other side as well with a loved one. And it is hard. I definitely struggled in that role. And with teens especially, some of them can be quite nasty, which is the role of a teen to a point. They're at that stage of development where they're individuating and getting independence. But yeah, it can be incredibly hard on the parents. So yeah, how would I? So I would say, firstly, in saying that, you have to try where you can and find breaks, and like, even if that's you go away for a weekend with your girls or your boys, or you try and find more time to just go for walks. And I did a parenting course recently, and the big thing was it was all the mums on there, the dads weren't there, but the mums were saying they didn't have time, they couldn't look after there was one dad on there, to be fair. They didn't have time, they couldn't look after themselves. And my point was, it's almost critical. You have to find time. And Tony Robbins, the self-help guru, he uses the whole net time, no extra time. So if you're in a queue waiting for coffee here, there's plenty of queues here. Like, that's a time when you can do emails, or obviously that's a work. I'm using this in a work context now. In terms of, it might be you put a song on. It might be on, if you've got an Apple Watch or Android or whatever. At least Apple has the whole mindful minutes. You stick it on for a 2-minute timer and do the breathing. You can be having a wee and doing that. Like, there's really no excuse not to look after yourself. It might mean you can't do it for 2 hours, fair enough. But it's really trying to fit in those. And then I set challenges, right, this week, try and do something for yourself, even if it's 10 minutes. And I know it's controversial, but Dr. Jordan Peterson said when his daughter was going through her, was it autoimmune and arthritis stuff? Anyway, and she was, a teen, having like hip and ankle surgeries and whatever else. Finding him and his wife were kind of getting in arguments and were just stressed out because all of their day was around the OCD. As I'm sure anyone here who lives with people with OCD, you might find yourself burning out. And they just made a rule. It was after 7 or 8 p.m. they were not allowed to discuss their daughter's illness. So like rules and boundaries like that I think can help. Getting your own therapist, I appreciate that adds another cost in. Typically, I always say this, like, non-OCD therapists are usually cheaper, so it's not going to be another huge expense, hopefully. Just a humanistic counsellor, someone who's going to be empathic, listen, all of that stuff, all the Carl Rogers stuff. And then in terms, do you want to say anything on that point before I...
Well, yeah, I think, I guess recognising what a difficult role that is to be in as a supporter. And it plays out in different ways, doesn't it? So you got to look at like the functional context and, is it a dynamic where someone's really in that supporting role and they might be drawn into more reassurance and accommodation? Or is it there's conflict and there's stress and there's difficulty? So really unpacking, those dynamics. And then, I guess a lot of validation and compassion that it is really tough on both sides of that, and it's no one's fault. The person with OCD did not choose to have this, not done anything to cause it. It is just, the way things have played out. But then on the other side of that, it's so demanding and tough, especially in more severe cases. So I think there's so much room for compassion and everyone, trying to cultivate that self-compassion. In that role is helpful. I mean, you were talking about the micro self-care and those sort of behaviors, 100% behind that. But then I like, trying to get the partners doing the same skills that the person's doing. So, we're all doing ACT skills together so that either the person's learning to surf the urge to rush in and support and accommodate, or they're surfing the frustration and the burnout and the annoyance, or whatever the difficult response from the partner is. I think with our OCD, because it's so much about the relationship, I sometimes don't think you need, you might have a dynamic where the sufferer is confessing and sharing thoughts in order to get reassurance. Obviously, the sooner we can, weed that out and get that not happening, the better. And then from there, I don't think there's always a big value in talking about the content, really. You can just say, I'm having ROCD, and that's more than enough, because it takes a lot, even a really caring, understanding partner who knows it's OCD and has really good psychoeducation, it's still hard stuff to hear. And, you know, we're all vulnerable and we can all feel insecure. So who wouldn't hear that and, you know, feel a little bit like, you know, is there any truth to it? Or, you know, be feeling the same stuff the person with OCD is. So sometimes sidestepping all of that and just saying, you know, you can say you're triggered, you can say I'm having a rough time, let's have a hug, but actually let's not talk about the content too much here and leave that for therapy with the therapist. I think that's sometimes important with our OCD. It's just hard for a partner to hear that sort of stuff.
It is. I think it also depends on their own like attachment styles. Like for me, that's incredibly hard for me to hear, and then I'm going to be in my head and then get my own OCD kind of tangled in it.
Yeah.
You know, I've worked with people before where their partner was like, "Yeah, great, I don't care."
Yeah,
like you just told me, like, and then they just water off a duck's back.
That's awesome.
And that's obviously their attachment style, whatever that is. And that's obviously going to be incredibly helpful.
Yeah, because it shows the irrelevance of the thoughts.
Yeah, but I think psychoeducation, the more we can learn to not take it as personally and diffuse from that ourselves, then the easier we're not, if we don't get triggered, we're not adding into the mix. But if we do, that's understandable. It's really bloody hard. I think also family therapy, couples therapy can be useful because, it's hard. And a family therapist especially is there. You can work alongside one-on-one therapy, but they're there to help you find new ways of communicating, especially with teens. I recommend it a fair amount. If I think the family's just not communicating and they're just butting heads, then it makes the ERP incredibly hard to do because the teens digging their heels in. Yeah. And then for adults, couples therapy obviously can be helpful to work through. You just got to be careful not to get pulled into like that. Like I was saying with my therapist earlier, where I almost left OCD out. So you'd almost have to leave OCD out the room. You can maybe talk about patterns, but leave the content, because I think the content, as we know, is largely irrelevant. And then the second part to that was support, how the loved ones can support the person with OCD. So for children and teens, space is obviously a big therapy, supportive parenting for anxious childhood emotions. Ellie Leibowitz, who created it or co-created it, he's here actually at the conference. And obviously that's aimed for like up to 18s. And I use it, I work with parents of usually of kids who are refusing to come to therapy. And it sometimes it's not worked for me, sometimes it's worked incredibly well. But I think the principles of space obviously can be used for everyone, which is the only reason you wouldn't do space with your partner. It's because it might be a bit patronizing. After this week, I'm going to pull back doing this accommodation. That might then cause issues in a relationship with the kid. You can do it because you have that power dynamic. But I think the principles of discussing with your partner where you accommodate and how you can pull that back with their permission. You say you're on the same page. If we're going to do this together, this week I'm pulling back this with your permission. And then increasing the supportive statements, which is, I know this is hard for you, but I know you can do it. Or I know you can ride this out. All of that stuff. Again, teens usually find that patronizing, but you do it anyway, because people don't feel, whether you're an adult or a teen, you often don't feel you can ride it out or cope or live with this anxiety, but you can. It's a feeling, and like you're saying, urge surfing, it will crash and pass. And the more we see that, more evidence we get, the more easier it is to let it crash and pass. And then we're not reinforcing the OCD cycle. And so I think, like an adapted version of space that's in collaboration with your partner, so there's not a power dynamic, I think might be.
Yeah, and getting high willingness from the client that they want the person to help them reduce the rituals over time, so that it's not done in a sort of coercive or controlling sort of way. It's done with high willingness and high, connection. But yeah, I think everything you said was great there.
So, and our OCD, just specifically talking to that, that's something that really plagued me. And the thing I really like, and I tell my clients is, and I heard this somewhere, but love is a verb, which is cheesy, but it's action. A verb is action, right? It's not, we always think about love as a feeling. And then I have clients that are like, oh, I don't feel in love with my partner, or they're not looking good enough today, and now I'm super triggered. And it's like, great, well, use all the ACT skills we've been doing, but hug them anyway, you know, tell them they look great anyway, like ask them to go for a walk anyway, and do it while you're anxious. Because often we pull, at least I did, pull back from those things, avoid them, and that obviously just feeds the OCD. And it's can I go for a walk with them even though I'm like ruminating? And then as you walk, that's where the skills come in, either mindfulness, ACT, noticing, naming, diffusion, saying, yeah, I'm really triggered right now, but you know what, you're really important to me, and let's go do this thing, whatever it is. And over time, I mean, that really made a huge difference for me and my clients, I think.
Yeah, I had little bits of it in the past as well. It wasn't a main theme for me, but I certainly had some periods with it. And yeah, learning to diffuse and get out of rumination was so helpful. And then I guess that, like with all OCD, there can be so much monitoring and checking feelings and kind of ruminating about feelings. Of course, something like love and attraction, the more you're doing that, the more it becomes, it's going to, you know, slip through your fingers until you don't know what you're feeling anymore. And then, of course, any arousal kind of layers on top of sexual arousal. So anxiety, anxious arousal can then amplify other arousal. And so you're judging all these muddled up feelings that you can't see, and then you're getting anxious, and then some arousal, and you're comparing that, and it's just a mess. You just need to step outside all of it, and like you said, live the actions of love and connect and get the compulsions down, get out of your sort of ruminative mind and focus on the values, and then see how the relationship's going. You know, like anyone else would do, check in every so often, how's my relationship going? But you can't judge a relationship when you are ruminating like that. You just, and you know, you could do it about anything, right? You could say, you know, we went to our favorite fast food Chick-fil-A for lunch, which, I don't know why we've landed on that, but we did enjoy it again.
Kind of. It's not healthy, is it? But it looks healthy.
But if I just ruminated all the time about why do I like it, do I like it, before you know it, I'm not going to know whether I like it or not anymore. So the reason that's not happening, I can just enjoy it, is I'm just there experiencing that meal with friends, having a nice time. So that's so much the skill with our OCD, I think, is getting out of those ruminations and into the values-based behavior in relationship. So partners can help with that. They, you know, I often get the partner reminding, as long as there's buy-in and they're happy to do it, but getting the partner to remind them of the skills and remembering, and, you know, you get very attuned to your partner, so you can see in their eyes when they're ruminating, you know, the kind of plays over a little bit. So those moments, you know, helping them to catch it and use the skills to get out of that rumination and back into the relationship. I like doing that with partners for sure.
Yeah, agreed. And for me, just one thing I want to say, we talked about emotions earlier. I think anger can be quite a big emotion in RCD. What I felt personally, what I've seen in not all my clients, but some of them, you know, something's not quite right with the partner, or they've, you know, it might be for me, my wife now, girlfriend at the time, didn't make a joke that I liked or something, and suddenly it's a wrong relationship, and now I'm angry because she hasn't been funny enough, or
you're judging that feeling, and then
exactly, and then you hold it in, I'm fine, and you're not fine, and then you end up snapping or whatever it is, and then that causes an actual problem in the relationship. Not to say OCD isn't an actual problem, but you know what I mean. But yeah, just one other thing, going back to the whole couples therapy, you know, I've no shame saying my wife and I went through couples therapy, and it was incredibly helpful, because for us, there were actually real issues that were separate to the OCD, because my OCD worries were completely different from the real world issues. But sometimes I wonder, you know, with our own attachment styles we bring into relationships, that they might do something that's minor that most people wouldn't care, but for us it triggers a big emotional response, a fear of abandonment, whatever it is in our attachment style, and then OCD blows it out of proportion. I don't think that's the case for everyone, but I think it was for me, and I had to learn that there was some sort of fear of abandonment coming up, and then use self-compassion on myself with that feeling to ride it out, so I don't do anything that's going to make an issue in my relationship or exacerbate OCD. So yeah, I don't think that's the case for everyone, but I think for me that rings true.
Almost all relationships need work, and there's
100%,
always stuff playing out. So, there's almost never a case when, looking at how I'm showing up in relationship and how I can do more of the behavior that connects me and less of the behavior that disconnects me, as FAP, functional analytic psychotherapy, would identify. We all benefit from doing that, don't we? I mean, I don't think anyone listening to this podcast won't relate to, there's things we do in relationship that aren't, so values based. So then that exacerbates and bounces off the OCD and in different ways, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. Last thing I'll say on relationship OCD is it's just figuring out who do I want to be in the relationship, and then can I live by that every day, regardless of what shows up in my head and my body. And it's hard, obviously, when you're super anxious, angry, whatever it is, to live that way. But it's a commitment to your values, to what matters. And I want to be someone who listens. I want to be someone who makes jokes or whatever it is. So can I try that even in the presence of all of this content that's deeply uncomfortable? And that goes for OCD generally, right?
Yeah. With self-compassion, because back to our perfectionistic point, we're always going to need to be compassionate around that, aren't we? Because no one's ever, I work on myself in relationship, but I'm never going to hit all the goals or do everything perfectly. So it's that combination of, showing up as the values-based version of you with self-compassion for your humanity. And as Kristen Neff says, being a compassionate mess at times, which I certainly like.
So next, I'm sure there's a lot we could have said on that. It's a big topic. It's one that deserves a lot of attention. So having fun. The comment came up about doing ERP with kids, and this weekend seeing them all have fun, and two of the people here, saw things on the itinerary and thought that would be good, and then realizing it was for middle schoolers or whatever. But okay, someone's having fun in the hallway.
There you go, perfect example.
Living by their values, and I guess it was, the question was kind of, I can speak to that a bit from as a therapist working with kids, but like how maybe you'd bring that in with adults. So me personally, one of my key values is playfulness. I love joking around. Sometimes that goes to the extreme with me, and it causes issues in my interpersonal relationships, as we've had a head butting before around that, and obviously it was dealt with very maturely, and
it was more of a hugging experience than headbutting.
But that's my own personal history coming into my values and making it the shadow side, as Jung would say, right? But it's an important value of mine. I like being playful, and I do that with my clients. And OCD is such a horrible, heavy thing that if you can't bring humor into it, it's just a horrible, heavy thing. And the humor reminds them, hopefully, that there's so much more to them than just the OCD. And it's also that diffusion. If you can joke about it, I see this now. And, again, anyone listening, moving my hand away. I see this. This is what the problem is, as opposed to being fused with it. So I do try, obviously, in the appropriate moment, do try and bring humor into it. With kids, very much using playful things, whether that's Play-Doh, whether that's making a game of, in the ERP, writing the thoughts down on paper, saying them in funny voices, different accents, Mickey Mouse, whatever the accent, and then playing basketball, throwing it in the bin as we do it, just trying to get creative with it. Young kids, I think, respond really well to that stuff, and they can make really good progress. Teens, you can do that, but they're starting to get a bit more serious.
Don't like your sense of humour.
Well, and everything's lame, and I'm lame, and dropping anchor from acts is just
lame.
Doesn't work, and it's terrible, and I'm an idiot for suggesting it. But do it anyway. You can eye roll at me. So, help me out here, because I'm
with adults. I think, inhibitory learning has that idea of expectancy violation and the sort of surprise element of learning. I think I've heard it other places in psychology, probably listening to Huberman or something like that, where they talked about, you learn things that are a surprise So humor, like, I mean, it is, as I'm talking like this, I'm thinking this is deconstructing humor, which you shouldn't do really. But, you know, it actually will improve learning, because if you have surprise, you know, people have a laugh, that will literally stay with them for a longer period of time and will influence them. So I think humor is massive. And I certainly try to bring that in, probably fail often, but certainly bring it in where I can. And certain clients, like, it also depends on their values, where they're at, what you're talking about, what level of pain we're in, all those sorts of things. But even in some of the darkest, deepest, painful places, like, the humor's still there, right? People will still,
100%.
you know, laugh away at stuff. So I think there's a huge place for it, and being playful. And I think, you know, the person who asked the question was sort of saying, could we bring that into adult exposure work with adults? I think it's such a good idea, and there's probably a lot more room for it. I mean, there's the sort of humor in the therapy room, but there's actual humor around the exposures. I guess with social anxiety and the shame attacking exposures, the sort of Albert Ellis, you know, goes back to Albert Ellis of, like, you know, walking around the streets with a banana on a dog lead, or, you know, there's a lot of, I guess people have tried to do humor in that way.
Like,
I mean, we've sometimes,
caveat, don't agree with that.
yeah, well, we've sometimes said that doesn't always land, or sometimes actually clients will say, I could do it, but it actually hasn't helped me with the presenting problem. But to some extent, you know, there's a way of doing those sorts of playful things during exposure that I do agree with.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and Steve Hayes is one for, you know, exposure is about response flexibility. So you want to be in an exposure situation and learning flexibility of everything, flexible attention, but flexible thinking. So he'll often get people to go into a mall, as you guys say over here, for panic exposure, and then look around and go, who's got the silliest haircut? You know, go into shops and ask, you know, funny questions and things. And then I think there's a lot of humor afterwards, sort of reflecting, you know, if your therapist has done it with you, it's like a shared experience of humor that, you know, connects you. And so I think that there's a lot of that. And then, I mean, I think, you know, just tuning into the person's sense of humor and what's fun and playful for them in their life, and can we weave that into the hierarchy somehow, or exposure menu.
I agree. And just you know, to go back to Albert Ellis' example you gave there, I just want to caveat that. I know you were giving that as like an extreme, but those shame exposures, because I know there's some OCD coaches that have used that, effectively traumatized.
That's the risk with that.
But yeah, absolutely, getting playful and exposures is fine, but you take it to the extreme in that shame area, it's unnecessary, and it causes more problems. And I think also there are other considerations with humor as well, in that humor can become a reassurance. If I am mocking OCD all the time, then that becomes, oh, you know, I'm not really a horrible monster that would attack people. And it's kind of like the making the jokes about it sometimes, I think, becomes a bit of a reassuring thing. If it's constant,
If it's constant, if it's done with that function, versus a sort of humorous metaphor or a playful image, which is done to highlight diffusion or highlight values-based behavior or exposure and courageously facing fear. I think if you... so it's getting it right, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. As you said, linking it to your client's values. Like, if my therapist at the time... because I'm also quite creative and playful, and if she wanted to do that, or you know, get creative, like in whatever form it is, 100% would have been up for that. That would, you know. So I think it's really knowing the client, and maybe even asking them, like, how silly do you want to get with this? How creative? How playful? How tactile?
Well, and you're very irreverent. I can never really say that word, but irreverent.
What does that mean?
That's when you do that kind of surprising humor that sort of shocks people. And that, you know, DBT, Marcia Linehan, talks about that in her training manuals and things. Irreverence is like a key quality for a therapist.
Funny you say that.
So powerful.
Yeah, because there's that talk earlier on, like, ACT, ERP, I-CBT, and they were just discussing. It was a good talk, all really good points by all of the clinicians. But the I-CBT lady, I think, said she doesn't do ERP because it's just not for her seeing someone in tears.
Well, she said with that context, didn't she? Said with POCD, it was a specific client where she couldn't get them to accept the uncertainty. It was just too painful. So that, I'm not sure she didn't. I think she used ERP still as well.
Oh, okay, fair enough. But let's say she doesn't, because it's going to ruin my example. Like the client comes to mind for me who sometimes is in that like very teary, very emotional, extremely triggered by the exposure. And occasionally I will, as you're saying, irreverent, cut through, make a joke, and then she laughs. She's still crying, but she's laughing. And then again, that's that diffusion from it.
Yeah.
That, I don't do that all the time. And I have a great relationship with this client. So I wouldn't do that if I just met a client, because, they might not come back. But I think in the right moment, it's incredibly...
Yeah, completely. And I was just thinking about the ACT, some of the diffusion practices, which I personally don't use a lot because I just like simplicity. I don't like people having millions of choices. I'm in an exposure context. I'm really feeling very overwhelmed, a lot of hyperarousal, can't really think. And then now I'm thinking, which option should I do, and going through everything. But very occasionally I have done some of the playful diffusion techniques with people where you sing the thoughts and things like that. But I always sing them. Like I never... Well, I invite them to. They can if they want, but I often sing them myself, and I can't sing at all. So it's a big exposure for me. And, the playfulness of seeing the therapist sing like a POCD thought or a harm thought, something like that. I think there's something about that sometimes, like of the client seeing that early on, which is like, oh, right, okay, it is just a thought. Obviously you don't want anyone repeating that, oh, it's just a thought, and that becoming reassurance, but that experiential sense of like, oh, it's just a thought, and I think humor can really underline that, definitely.
Yeah, and then we'll move on in a second, but another client comes to my mind. In terms of dark humor, I have that in my humor repertoire. I quite like that.
I'll say.
And I had a client who was like that too, and he had ROCD. And we were using a lot of dark humor around his obsessions and the traditional ERP of like going one. I think Kim Quinlan's book, she talks about one up game. Yeah. So it's that sort of thing, but with dark humor. Yeah. And we were both just laughing throughout the process. And again, that's diffusion. That's it's also facing it, it's acceptance. And we were both connecting and having fun with it. And that worked for him. But most of my clients couldn't do that. They wouldn't want to do that. It's too, I can't do that. It's too, but for him, that was who he was, and he loved it. So, so we've got two more things: just right, and exposures around just right.
Yeah, just right. I mean, all of these answers, we're assuming that everyone's done this sort of assessment and formulation, and I'm just picking some of the key things that come to my mind. I think we're just right, that uncomfortable feeling to me is so key, because if someone's going to challenge it, they really do have to get good with that uncomfortable. It's not always, often it is an anxiety, right? It's kind of discomfort, sort of negative valence. Something's not right in the world. Obviously there can be anxiety, there can be other emotions tangled in, but it's like, it's hard to even put it into words. I'm struggling to describe it now even, but so to me that means there's a lot of acceptance work from ACT, because we've got to become a master of that feeling, like incredible at feeling that feeling and focusing on what matters in the moment. Like we've got to become the expert of that. And then of course the result of that over time is that it will get easier. But there is a stage in the exposure work where it's like, mastering that ability to feel that and do what matters. And that's tough for people, right? That's a hard thing to ask someone to do.
I wonder if initially, though, you could, thinking of like dipping in and out the stream, which is basically getting people to ruminate on purpose, the only time we'd ever get them to ruminate. And then drop anchor, so you start to diffuse, engage with the present moment, then you ruminate again, drop anchor, ruminate, drop anchor, do it sort of 3-4 times, so they can learn to get hooked. When they're hooked, they know how to unhook. So I wonder if that's a first step of, can you imagine a scenario where something wasn't quite right and didn't feel right, feel that in your body, and then now we try and unhook from that before we go into the practicalities of it.
Oh yeah, so definitely would be working those skills up like that, including dipping in and out the stream. And then back to the pinky press up or whatever it was called.
The one foot dash, did he say?
1 foot dash, he said, he had some good ones, didn't he? Finding that way to get in touch with that feeling in small ways. So imaginal exposure. So it could be dipping in and out of the stream, or equally it could be just, for a lot of clients, just picturing things not being just right. And using the image of that or the verbal description of that to get in touch with that feeling. And typically that's going to be easier. So that's your kind of one step in. But I really emphasize ACT, I would always build up the skills first so that someone's quite good at accepting uncomfortable feelings. They might have done it with things like physical exercise and cold showers and other uncomfortable feelings that aren't as difficult as this one. And then once those skills are in place, then the sort of how do we gradiate it, although obviously inhibitory learning is a lot more, move around the menu. But, as we heard from one of the specialists yesterday, with a lot of severe cases, you just can't do that. You have to move very gradually, at least to begin with. So, what are those gradual ways of getting in touch with that feeling? And the brilliant thing of doing exposure work together in session, right? To, can I move? If someone would just hangs around with me long enough, there'll be loads of things that get to them because I'll be, everything's in chaos and I'm certainly never very ordered and just right. So probably coming to therapy with me will be an exposure for that. And then, but finding ways of working in session, on these things, and like, how can we, do that together, guide them through the skills with that feeling, build that up, and then they take that out and do that in their life.
Yeah, and I think, we're not going to say anything you don't already know for the people that ask the question. Probably know way more than us on this. But I guess for people listening, mapping out where do you not feel right, when are you triggered, and then the exposures would just roll from that.
And why,
why?
On the hierarchy as well, like, why do I want to face this? What's it for? And what's it about? And then using those values as you're getting in touch with them. And the workability of the perfectionism, the same idea here that, just right will be causing loads of things to go just wrong in other places. So identifying that, we can't be doing just right all we couldn't do that on everything. You just couldn't live. It'll bump up against relationships. It'll bump it up against other goals. So making sure they identify all those places that it's pulling them away from values, and then using that as the motivator.
Yeah, nice. And lastly, I-CBT. Jonny and I'm kind of partially trained in I-CBT.
You are,
I did, Bronwyn and Katie, I think, kindly sent me the I-CBT training. I did about half of it, and then I stopped because at that time I had so much going on and I haven't gone back to finish it yet. I liked what I started to learn. The evidence has been there for many years about its potential effectiveness.
And you had Kieran on the podcast a long time ago.
Kieran in 2016, back when it was IBT, inference-based therapy, And then, again, a nod from Paul. And now it's I-CBT, inference-based cognitive behavioural therapy, which was a clever rebranding, because suddenly all these ERP therapists started to think, oh, this is nice, this is new, this is exciting. When it was IBT, no one gave a damn. That's the chip on my shoulder about it. Because that podcast kind of fell on its head when it came out. I think people listened to it, and I'm glad I got to chat with Kieran, obviously, before he passed. Awesome, I thought. Yeah, he's a great guy. Yeah. So I think it's an interesting therapy. I think it's as it was said today, it's needed. I will just say, we haven't figured it all out. ERP is great, doesn't work for everyone. ACT came in to enhance it a bit, great, again, doesn't work for everyone. You could even say ACT by itself, I think, is useful. But I think I-CBT is potentially a necessary therapy, because everyone's different. Everyone's going to have their view of OCD differently, and they can't lean into the uncertainty in ERP, or for whatever reason they might not be able to engage in ACT.
I mean, for me, I'm not trained in it. I've done a little, I think I did one online workshop on it. I read the book, I thought what I really liked about the book was the psychoeducation. I thought they really get the psychoeducation great. The kind of OCD bubble, I'm going to forget all the terms, so I-CBT therapists, forgive me because it's a while since I read the book, but that idea of like going off into your imagination and being, lost in that bubble. I think they described that so well, and the sort of self concepts, the sort of vulnerable self, there's a lot of vulnerable self in compassion focused therapy. That's been a concept that's been talked about for a long time there. So I really resonate with those ideas and like how the history might be in that vulnerable self. I'm not sort of pursuing it myself at this point. I might do. I would like to hear more, and maybe this is asking someone to come on the podcast at some point, but I'd like to hear more recovery stories and hear like the ins and outs of how someone applies that in their ongoing recovery work. I'd love to hear that. To me, like I look at it through the lens of my own OCD, and I was highly ruminative. I was like inception, mental compulsion upon mental compulsion. If someone had said to me, just stop ruminating, I would have not heard them because I was so busy ruminating. So I look at it and I think, I can't imagine how I wouldn't turn it all into mental compulsions when I was struggling, but that's probably my ignorance, and probably with the right therapist walking me through that. I'm also someone that I like to see the unity of approaches rather than separate them. And I heard in the talk today, they were talking about, it's important in some ways to keep it separate as another treatment option. And that made total sense. I could hear what they were saying completely. But to me, I always see the overlap. So I do see a lot of ACT in it. I see, I underlined and scribbled all over the book, and there are parts that to me did sound quite exposure-like, if I'm honest. So I think, they were talking at one of the talks that it's really important to do the mechanistic research to kind of understand the mechanisms of change. So I would love to see that with I-CBT, and identifying what are the mechanisms of change and compared to ERP and ACT, and so once that's all in place, and if I hear some really good stories and things, I'd certainly be open to being trained in it. But at this point, I'm just sort of trying to deepen what I'm doing, really. But it is nice to have that as an option, because the sort of dirty secret that not all therapists will say is that we can't help everyone. You hear a lot of the experts speaking, and you'd think they can help everyone. And
on my podcast,
have 100%,
right?
Yeah.
A lot of the experts I interview never say they have clients that they can't help.
Yeah.
You've said it.
Yeah.
I can't.
Yeah.
I think maybe one other person has said it, and I've done 444 episodes.
Yeah.
We know in the NHS, they help a lot of people, but they don't help everyone.
Yeah. And I'm sort of biased with this because the nature of me emphasizing an ACT approach to ERP means that lots of people reach out to me that have done ERP before. So all of my client group is people that have done ERP, often with great places, and everything else is still struggling. So I have a sort of slightly biased view because I'm not seeing, people who come to me often have had difficulty with ERP. But I can't help them all, and not everyone is willing to go deep into acceptance. Not everyone is willing to, face this stuff. So it's lovely to have, another thing that we could suggest and direct people to, and if it's getting the outcomes it's getting, that's awesome.
100%. Yeah. I think, it's very much needed. There's more therapies that are needed, and I think. There was another point in one of the talks today that the therapist needs to find a therapy that they like and suits them. I don't know if they said their personality, but that's the way I interpreted it. Yeah. ACT focused ERP works for me. I do traditional type ERP as well for some clients. Functional analytic psychotherapy is a therapy relationally that interests me as well. So it's you pick what works for you, and I appreciate I-CBT. At the minute, it hasn't done it for me just yet, and that's not me criticizing it. It's just saying me as an individual. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think you gravitate towards the therapy that makes sense to your personality. Yeah, 100%. Definitely. I mean the psychoeducation, I can't say it enough. I think they get that. Yeah, that is
amazingly well, really strong.
Yeah. And I did go for a while using the initial stages of I-CBT with my clients because I really like that approach. I've stopped. That's more just because I forgot to keep doing it. But I will revisit it at some point. And again, I know the lady said you shouldn't integrate it. It's a standalone treatment. I'm trained integratively. I will integrate everything, whether it's meant to be done or not, and whether it's useful or not. That's who I am.
And that'll happen. That'll happen more and more. There's no way of people aren't going to, everyone's integrative to some extent because no one is going treatment manual exactly by the book the whole time.
But it's the same with ERP. There'll be ERP therapists that were like, no, I'm not integrating ACT. And we'll argue ERP is doing what ACT does anyway, just in a different way. Obviously, I agree with that to a point, but not entirely.
I think when the outcomes are good, I agree. Like you can see when you hear a good recovery story from ERP on its own, you can often hear acceptance, values, diffusion, present moment attention within what the person's doing. So ACT isn't the only way to do that by any
100%.
by any means.
And compassion focused therapy is the other therapy I integrate.
Yeah, me too.
But 100%, it's needed. I hope they continue to research, which of course they will. And absolutely more stories about its effectiveness. Thank you for listening to this week's podcast. And thank you to our Patreons who helped make this episode possible. And if you would like to find out more about Patreon and the rewards and benefits, then there will be a link in the episode description. If you enjoy the OCD Stories podcast and would like to support us, please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to the podcast. And thank you to NoCD for supporting our work. And if you want to find out more about NoCD, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD Stories or click the link in the episode description. And quick disclaimer, guys, this podcast is not therapy. It is not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And until we speak, take care.